Hey, true believers. Today we're going over X-Men Adventures Issue 2. And I remember this was one of the first X-Men comics that I had ever read. And going back and reading it years later as an old fart, it still holds up. Both the comic and the show. And I remember when I first read this book, opening it up to this, God, what was it, 92? How old was I? I had to at least been like 6 or 7, and just thinking, oh my God, that is intense. But it drew me in. Yeah, I can't believe that the editors at this time, for a show that was based off a kids, or a comic that was based off a kids show, this was allowed. It drives me nuts, but it kind of shows where we were back in the early 90s to now. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But let's talk about who made this book. The print date was December of 1992. Script was Ralph Macchio. Pencils was Andrew Wildman. Inks were Robert Campanella. Letters were Michael Higgins. Colors were Kevin Somers. Editor was Kelly Corvus. Group editor was Bob Harris. And the mutant menace himself, Tom DeFalco. And even in the animated series, I love that they made sure to make you feel like you're a part of the club. And this was based on the teleplay by Mark Edward Edens. Now, real quick, I'm going to get on the soapbox, and I want to hear y'all's thoughts. Let's rewind the clock and talk about shows from 70s, 80s, 90s, and even maybe the early 2000s. I'm going to use Batman the Animated Series and X-Men the Animated Series as kind of my thesis here. Is the creators of both shows said that they wanted to make their shows engaging with adult themes that would kind of be explained to children, so that that like they're not talking down to them or making them feel stupid, like it's just, I guess you could say a sloppy lunch handed to them. Instead, it was something that was polished and made you think. And I even remember watching these shows and learning from them. Now, that was the 90s. Let's go back a little bit further to the 80s with Turtles, G.I. Joe, and He-Man. Now, the shows were corny, but they were action-packed. And at the end, to kind of make it more focused on kids, they would do those PSAs at the end. And even though you go back and it's corny, it would still kind of give you that sense of morality, where they'd say, don't bully your, people, share with your friends, don't pollute, etc., so forth. And a lot of those stuck with a lot of kids. And even going back to the early 90s, like 1990, we had Captain Planet. And even though that show was kind of a little on the nose, I remember being a kid saying, I'm a Planeteer and I'm going to help the planet. And when I would go to the park, I'd pick up trash saying, look, I'm a Planeteer too. Now, being a father in this era, I'll watch some of the shows that my kid watches, Sesame Street aside, and I'm thinking, my God, like Blippi. There's some things in there that are good, but that guy, he drives me nuts. And Morpho, Paw Patrol, I don't mind too much, but it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it was on the level that we had as kids. Even think about it, Ghostbusters, what were some of Thundercats? And then it's like, even going back to like Super Friends, the Super Friends, and then Spidey and his Amazing Friends or whatever. And it was not on the level that we had now. I just feel like things have just gotten more soft. The only thing that show that maybe nowadays that's close to having a plot and some good, points would be like Bluey. But again, it's not going back to a show that was action-packed, that had violence, but still had a point of, excuse me, I'm still getting over a cough, conveying things to kids in a way that they could understand. And that's what the animated series was. And to me, that's why these comics, the animated series comics, and the show in and of itself, along with Batman the Animated Series, is still revered, still holds up, and highly sought after for like memorabilia. And that's just my thought. Let me know what you guys think. I've just been wanting to talk to people about that and get that out and see what everyone else thinks. Now back to the comic and relating to this horrific graphic. At the end of the last issue, and this was not in the cartoon, Morph kind of becomes comatose. He has this precognition. He says, death is coming tonight. And you can see how he just freezes and he goes, it's going to happen. It's going to happen tonight. And you can see that Wolverine's kind of new to the team because he's very hard on Morph. I mean, they're supposed to be friends like you saw in the show. But he's like, now let's get a move on. We can't waste any more time nursemating and dear Mr. Braindead. And I love how Storm, even in the animated series here, shows why she can hold her own as the second in command of the X-Men. Hold your tongue, Wolverine. He'll be treated as I deem fit. I'm in charge of this detail, not you. And then we get to Cyclops, Rogue, kind of watching everything, seeing the ambush beginning to happen, and they need to, make a distraction. And look at this artwork. They did not need to go this hard for a show that was related to a cartoon. Picking this up, like I remember me and my friend were sitting down reading. I was reading this and he was reading, I think X-Men 16, which was part of the Executioner song. And the artwork was almost similar, like of course different pencilers, but it had the same style. And that is absolutely awesome that they just wanted to keep that level of quality. And now listen to Beast and how he talks. Now, before we get into it, yeah, maybe for the animated series, some of the way he spoke was a little over the top, but it still showed the level of intellect that Hank has. And here, of course, he was always the fun-loving Beast that we all know, not this, pod person from Krakoa. He goes, pardon me, do you know where the sanitary facilities are housed? Huh? Well, bam! Wrong answer. And you can see how Hank can be loving, but even when, the time calls for it, he knows when to smack a fool, as you see. And now we kind of get some more moments with Morph. And kind of going back, I just want to talk about Hank here, because he's here, just a long way of saying Eureka, as Archimedes was known to have intoned upon discovering the principle of displacement. Eureka! And then even here, Wolverine, Ollie North would be proud. Whew, that's a heavy one to put in a kid's book. Can the conversation and put those hairy thumbs on the keyboard. I got a cold brew waiting back at the X-Mansion. Again, based off a cartoon. Whew. Now look at this. X-Men come in full force because they see what's coming down to the compound that the other X-Men are in. And here, this would be something that you would see in the main book. Just all that great action poses of Rogue and Gambit and what's his name? Cyclops. And then, of course, we get the moment where Morph gets gunned down. And again, it's still hard to look at here. I mean, it was hard to look at in the animated series, but here, just full on laser blast. And we get where Jean says, oh my God, it's Morph. His readings, yes, Jean, I sense it as well. The readings have ceased. And of course, Beast gets captured. And just the whole thing about, and one thing that I love is, I can't say love, but it shows how Cyclops always takes responsibilities when Morph gets hit. Cyclops says, I should have stopped him. My fault. So he always takes responsibility, even though a lot of the times the team may see him as callous. He has to be, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then Gynrich and Trask wanting to experiment, and with Jubilee here, that's why they have her captured, yeah, I hate how Henry Gynrich, I mean, he kind of had some redeeming qualities in the comic, but in the show, he was just always a full-on jerk. And now going back to Cyclops taking responsibility, Cyclops, that's all there is to tell, Professor. If I could have done any more, I understand, Scott. What a whitewash. You did nothing, Summers, except leaving Morph and Beast to buy it. I got a good mind to, Logan. I know how you feel, but I had to consider the safety of the entire group. Now, the one thing that I wish that they would have left in the comic that was in the animated series is when they exit the Blackbird, Wolverine just sucker punches Cyclops, and it's a great moment to show how much hatred Wolverine has for Cyc in that moment. And then Geinrich, again, being just a big jackass, he goes, "Get straight, furball. You're here until you rot if you don't tell me, if you don't come across and tell me things. I had merely mistaken your imposing edifice for that which houses my hairdresser. Sufficient enough for you? Keep up with the jokes, and that fur will turn gray in here. Now, excuse me, I've got a corpse to attend to." Ooh, just full-on jerk. And of course you're supposed to hate him. Just, damn, he was over the top villain. And then Beast goes back to thinking of his final moments with Morph, and it's very sweet. And you can see how much revenge Hank wants for his friend. Now, suffice it to say, Geinrich kind of gets his coming-ups from the higher-ups in the government, which makes him and Trask have to flee the country before they're discovered, but at least not with some lovely payback from the X-Men with some excellent action. And this is kind of where Jubilee finally enters the fold of the team. And here, she's nervous about entering the mansion. And this kind of, and then of course, I think I was watching an interview, I think it was on Channel Awesome, the Nostalgia Critic. He was interviewing the two showrunners from the animated series. And they were talking about how in the original comics, of course, the young girl that enters the team at the time was Kitty Pryde. But they decided to use Jubilee because she was newer, and a lot of fans knew her more than Kitty, which, she came out years earlier. So that's why they used Jubilee in her place. Now here with the comic, I wish that they would have done the goodbye here in the comic that they used instead of what they used in the show, where they say, "You'll come and visit us, won't you, dear? We want to see you. Don't cry, kid, it's for the best." "Of course, Mom. You're my family. We'll always be that, won't we?" Which, going back and watching the show, it's kind of heartbreaking because she never, ever visits her parents again. But this was a sweet just panel, as where I hated that they used in the show. "Does a mall rat like chili fries?" Ugh. That line just makes you cringe so hard. So this, I like that for the book. At least it's a lot more dramatic and a lot more sentimental. And then again, I talked about this in the issue 1 review, how the Watcher says that this is an alternate reality. He goes, "On this earth, as on your own, this noble band of mutants persevered despite dire circumstances. Strength of character is their bulwark against a harsh humanity. We shall look in on these warriors again and see how they fare. This I know, for I am the Watcher." And some of the dialogue, guys, I remember reading it when I was a kid and I didn't quite understand it. But some of the stuff stuck with you, and as you got older, you're like, hey, that makes more sense. And going back reading it now, you're like, dang, this stuff kind of taught me some stuff. As we're, you go back and read some more modern books, and you're just like, man, they've really watered things down. So, this book still holds up. I miss the Fox Kids Network. They always had some great shows. But anyway, that aside, excellent book, excellent show. And I hope that you all can kind of see why this still holds up to this day. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please first and foremost support your local comic shop or wherever it is you like to pick up your comic books. And if you've enjoyed this review, we really would appreciate if you take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Helps the club channel more than you could possibly know. And if you don't mind hitting that fancy little X bell next to subscribe, that way as we continue to upload content, you guys get notified. Come to the channel, and we love hearing your thoughts and feedback down in the comments below or our social media pages, which I'll make sure to leave the links down in the description. So with all that said, thank you so much for stopping by. Hope you all continue to have an absolutely amazing day reading, and happy hunting, true believers.